I shouldn't make movies anymore. Should go to a lunatic asylum.
Fitzcarraldo is a film released in 1982 by acclaimed German director Werner Herzog.
This is movie. This is really movie.
The film is about a rubber baron named Brian Sweeney Fitzgerald who, in an effort to reach a rubber territory impassable by boat due to strong rapids, comes up with a ridiculous idea of building a 320-ton steamship and hoisting it over a mountain. How was Werner going to visualize this for his movie? By building an actual 320-ton steamship and hoisting it over a mountain. At this point, Werner Herzog had a bit of a reputation for doing crazy stunts in the name of cinema. He lived on rafts for weeks when filming Aguirre, got thrown into prison multiple times while filming Fata Morgana, and strapped himself to a moving car for Strozek. But he's not a miracle worker. He doesn't do the impossible.
What I keep doing is the doable. Do the doable.
And as far as he was concerned, pushing a steamship over a mountain was doable. It would be time-consuming, sure, and probably very expensive, but it shouldn't be that hard, right? Well, he thought wrong. Very, very wrong.
People have lost their lives. People have been in a plane crash and 5 of them in critical condition.
We ran into a border war between Peru and Ecuador. Our camp for 800 people in the jungle burned down. How can you push people into their own death for the sake of a goddamn film?
Sometime in the mid-70s, Werner Herzog was traveling through the French town of Karnak. Karnak is most known for hosting thousands of rock monuments, which were erected over 4,000 years ago during the Neolithic period.
I see there's a little kiosk. They sold a brochure, and in the brochure it's written that this couldn't have been done by Neolithic people. It could have been only alien astronauts. And I thought, bullshit.
Determined to prove the French brochure wrong, Werner immediately starts theorizing ways that the Neolithic man could have erected those rocks.
If you give me 2,000 men, maybe 3,000 men, and give me, let's say, 1 year or 2 years, I'm gonna move you a stone. I could show you on the ground. Let's say this is the ground. I would build a ramp, let's say, over 1 mile, and then I would move the slab. Well, let's suppose we have the slab.
The point is that it could be done, even in Neolithic times. Now, Werner had no intentions of moving any big rocks anytime soon, so he just lets the thoughts simmer in his head for a while. A few years later, though, his friend Jose Queclan comes to him with a pitch for a potential feature film. He proposes a movie about a guy named Carlos Fitzcarraldo, a Peruvian rubber baron who was active during the late 1800s. Werner thinks it's kinda thin stuff for a feature film, not worth the effort of filming in the jungle in any case. But then, Jose mentions a throwaway fact, which was that Fitzcarraldo once dragged a 30-ton steamship from one river to another over an 11-kilometer-long stretch of land, which has since been known as the Fitzcarraldo Isthmus. Suddenly, it all clicks. Werner sees the whole movie in his head.
It's called Fitzcarraldo, and it is about a crazy man of Irish descent whose name is Fitzgerald. But since nobody down there on these Amazon tributaries can pronounce his name properly, he calls himself Fitzcarraldo. Actually, he moves a huge steamboat, which is about 140 feet long and 3 stories high, across a mountain.
The image of a massive 3-story ship being hoisted over a mountain doesn't leave his mind. He needs to make this movie, and he needs to use a real steamship, not a plastic model.
And I've always said we will not do the plastic solution with a plastic boat across a studio hill in Hollywood. We will actually do it.
Now, the immediate problem with this idea is that no one has even attempted anything remotely like this before. Even the original Fitzcarraldo didn't move the entire ship at once. He chopped it up into dozens of smaller pieces first, before dragging the pieces across flat land. Werner's ship, on the other hand, is going to be about 10 times bigger. He's going to drag it uphill and in one piece. As far as the engineering is concerned, this is uncharted territory. But it doesn't take a genius to figure out that it will take a very long time and be ridiculously expensive. So Werner goes to various Hollywood distributors looking for investors. But everywhere he goes, he encounters the same problem, which is that they just love the screenplay, but they're a bit worried that dragging an actual 320-ton steamship up a mountain might be a bit far-fetched.
20th Century Fox at the time wanted to produce the film. However, only with a miniature plastic replica and what they called in a good jungle. And they meant the Botanic Garden in San Diego. And I asked them, gentlemen, what's the bad jungle then? And then it became frosty and I knew I was alone.
Werner quickly realizes that none of these guys get it. So he decides to clear out his savings account and put the money up himself for now. But where do you even begin with a project like this? Well, let's start with the ships. Werner needs 3 ships in total. 1 rusty one that Fitzcarraldo buys earlier in the movie to fix up, 1 fully working ship that he pulls up the mountain, and 1 identical ship that he sends down the Pongo later in the movie. He also needs to find a location with a very specific geography. He needs 2 rivers that run in parallel with a mountain between them. The mountain has to be big enough to be impressive on film, but not so big as to be unassailable. The rivers also have to be big enough to accommodate a massive 320-ton steamship on both sides. It takes Werner months of searching before he finds a suitable location, but in the end, he finds one here, in northwestern Peru, between the Rio Marañón and the Rio Cenepá. Then he needs to build a camp to house over 1,000 people. And the camp needs to include plumbing, electricity, cooks, and medical personnel. A hard task indeed, but Werner has organized similar things in the jungle before, and as long as he doesn't invite Kinski this time, things will probably work out fine. But the main problem with building a camp in such a remote location is that there is nowhere nearby you can get supplies from.
The next town where you can buy a torchlight battery is 800 kilometers away.
So Werner also sets up an office here, in the city of Iquitos. Iquitos is a Peruvian port city of around 160,000 residents. There are no roads leading here, only boats or planes. The power cuts out multiple times a day, and the mail never arrives on time, but it will have to do. Iquitos is where they will run their supplies from, where they will build their ships, and also where they will film most of the movie. Also in Iquitos lies Werner's only contact with the outside world, a telex machine. Think of it like the evolutionary middle step between a telegraph and a fax machine. It works about half the time. Organizing all of this is incredibly time-consuming and expensive, and Werner blows through essentially all his life savings getting everything up and running. He needs investors now, but he doesn't even have an actor to play Fitzcarraldo yet. Enter Jack Nicholson.
Here's Johnny!
Jack Nicholson is very keen on the screenplay, and if he joins on, it would no doubt have investors drooling. But as much as Jack likes the movie, he also really doesn't want to miss any Lakers games, so the idea of being stuck with Werner Herzog in the Peruvian jungle for 4 months is not very appealing. Also, he wants $5 million, which is an immediate non-starter. So they go for their second choice, Warren Oates. Not as big of a name as Jack, but he seems like he would make a good Fitzcarraldo. And he seems to be very positive to the project. In the meantime, though, Werner has even bigger problems, and it has to do with the position of the camp. It's right next to the border between Peru and Ecuador, and those countries are not happy with each other.
What we did not know, there was an impending border war with Ecuador, and passage on the river that was near the border was not allowed. They even shot at our ship once.
This encroaching border war means that many of the areas in which Werner was planning on filming in have become restricted military zones, and they're not gonna let Werner waltz on through with a 320-ton steamship without a permission slip. So Werner has 2 choices here. Either 1, try to convince the Peruvian government to give him access permits to what is essentially a militarized war zone, or 2, make his own damn permit.
I fabricated a 4-page shooting permit with all sorts of permissions. I mean, everything in the book was allowed to me, and it was signed by the President of the Republic, Belaunde, and his Secretary of State and his Chancellor.
Well, that doesn't entirely fix the problem with the military. It does alleviate it to some degree. But he's not out of the woods yet, because the biggest problem facing the film's production right now is the ongoing conflict with the locals. Alright, so this part is very complicated, but I'll try and give a very oversimplified explanation of what happened and then add some footnotes along the way if I feel like giving some extra context. But basically, Werner's camp is built on the territory of the Awajún people, who are the indigenous people living in this part of Peru. Now, just to immediately complicate things further, back in the 70s, the Awajún people were usually referred to as the Aguaruna people. Aguaruna is generally not the preferred term these days, but to avoid any confusion when discussing the sources and organizations of the time, it's the term I'll be using for the rest of this segment. But in any case, the Aguaruna have historically lived in smaller semi-nomadic communities on the Rio Marañón and its tributaries. For much of their history, they maintained a high degree of autonomy over their territory. However, beginning in the 20th century, the Aguaruna faced growing pressures from outside actors encroaching on their territory, including state-sponsored settlers, missionary activities, and the expansion of oil and lumber operations. In response to these mounting pressures, there was a growing need for the Aguaruna to organize themselves politically, and so in 1977, the Council of Aguaruna and Huambisa people was established, working as the de facto political leadership of the Aguaruna communities in Peru. Got that? Cool. Now in comes Werner. In 1978, Werner gets a filming permit from the Peruvian government and gets permission to build the camp by some of the local Aguaruna community leaders, but not by the newly established Aguaruna Council. And the council does not want to give Werner permission to make Fitzcarraldo on their territory, because Fitzcarraldo was a real guy who enslaved and killed hundreds of indigenous people during the rubber boom, and they don't want to contribute to a film that shows Aguaruna people being subjugated by Europeans.
Llevarlo a Europa podía presentar como que los aguarunas y huambisas podríamos, en aquel entonces el tiempo de caucho, han sido explotados, matados, qué sé yo.
Werner responds by essentially ignoring the concerns of the council, further claiming that the council has no actual authority over the region he's staying in.
Right in this area, there is some sort of a unique political movement, separatist movement. The Indians in this region have founded a council, and this council has not been recognized by the central government.
This does not help his situation. As far as the Aguaruna Council is concerned, Werner is actively trying to bypass the power structures of the indigenous people in the area to force through his boat movie against the community's wishes. In response, they launch a massive media campaign against Werner Herzog and the film company.
Before I even started shooting, I was accused of committing human rights abuses and putting people opposing indigenous leaders in jail. It was completely unbased.
This is the only time I've heard Werner raise his voice.
Yes, but that is not my problem. Sorry. The press in Fitzcarraldo is not my problem. It is a problem of the media. And I was accused, and I mean, literally, I was accused of forcing native Indians of the rainforest with force of weapons into slave labor for my film.
Werner insists that the claims made against him and the film company are all baseless allegations made up by the media. And to his credit, I'm sure a lot of what came out in the press at the time was either blatantly false, exaggerations taken at face value, or statements twisted by the telephone game. But I also think he might be using that as a shield to avoid addressing any criticisms of how he was handling the situation. Whatever the case, things were not looking good for the future of the movie. Werner hears through the grapevine that members of the Aguaruna Council are planning an attack on the camp, so he has to hire guards to protect the camp 24/7. There's no way Werner is going to be able to finish the movie under these conditions. Werner needs to come to some sort of agreement with the council if he ever wants to complete the film. So he goes to the headquarters of the Aguaruna Council in Naparuca, despite everyone warning him that they will kill him on sight. But Werner doesn't care, he just wants to make his damn boat movie. So Werner sits down for a meeting with the council, and thankfully, they don't actually kill him on sight. In fact, the tone is relatively civil, but the message from the council is clear. If Werner Herzog wants to live, it would be best for him to leave the Rio Marañón. At this point, Werner has had enough. Between the border war on one side and the council dispute on the other, Fitzcarraldo is going to collapse any second. So he leaves the camp and plans to abandon it completely in the following weeks. But before he gets a chance to properly transition out of the camp, Aguaruna warriors rush in and burn it to the ground. Damages to the camp were estimated at around $80,000, but it is above all the waste of time I am concerned about, Herzog said. In the end, over an entire year's worth of work wasted, all his life savings in the gutter, and his public reputation in shambles, Werner has yet to shoot a single second of film. In fact, he was back at square one.
It is very, very difficult, and we are struggling on. I try to be a good soldier. I will hold out on this outpost, and I will try to make that film.
It would take almost a full year before he finds another suitable location for his film, but eventually, he finds one between Rio Camisea and Rio Urubamba. This place is so remote that they have virtually zero contact with the outside world. They can just about reach Iquitos by shortwave radio, but that's about it. This is where he'll make his camp. Good news is that Werner has confirmed all the actors now. Warren Oates tapped out a month before shooting due to health problems, but Werner has since signed on Jason Robards to play the role of Fitzcarraldo. And for his sidekick, he has signed on Mick Jagger.
A good actor, do you think?
No, not a good actor. That would be wrong to say. He's a sensation. And nobody has realized that what a performer is that man.
Also, Werner actually has investors now, which means that he has a couple of $1 million to blow through. If everything goes to plan, it should be just enough to finish this movie, and Werner will make sure everything goes according to plan. This time, there will be no border war, and he'll make extra sure to be on good terms with the indigenous population, which in this part of Peru are the Mashigenga people. The Mashigenga are much more amenable to Werner and the film company, though not because they have faith in his artistic vision or anything like that. In fact, most of them think Werner's plan of moving a ship over a mountain is incomprehensibly stupid, but they go along with it for two reasons. Number one, Werner pays them double the average salary.
All these people got paid twice as much as they would earn in the best kind of job that they could get in Peru.
Now that sounds a lot more impressive than the actual dollar amount, which was about $3.50 a day, plus lodging, food, and some ammunition. But more importantly, it gives them a bargaining chip against the local settlers. The Mashigenga, like a lot of other indigenous people in Peru, were having a lot of problems with encroaching settlers coming in on their territory, and Werner's film is providing a lot of relatively well-paying job opportunities which they can use to deprive the settlers of their labor. So with everything seeming to fall into place, Werner can finally start getting the new camps ready for when the first actors show up in January 1981.
Wilbur, you are definitely my man.
With Mick Jagger and Jason Robards arriving in Iquitos, they begin shooting almost immediately, and things seem to be going well. Though behind the scenes, there's trouble brewing, and it mostly has to do with Jason Robards. See, unlike Mick and Werner, who are athletic 30-somethings, Jason Robards is pushing 60, and he is very aware of his own mortality, and he is scared as hell of the jungle. Werner is complaining that Robards keeps delaying the production because he refuses to travel to the camp until they install a heart and lung machine, and then a defibrillator. And it doesn't help that right after Robards arrives at the camp, one of the workers dies suddenly from a mysterious illness. The same day, another worker drowns in a canoe accident. A few days after that, one of the cameramen gets his toe bitten off by a piranha. Werner tries to calm people down by swimming in a river full of piranhas to prove how it's actually super safe, but it doesn't help. Robards is convinced that this movie is going to be the end of him. He's eating steaks flown in from Miami because he doesn't trust the food at the camp, and he refuses to partake in the local masato, which is a type of alcohol made from crushed yucca fermented with human spit. On the other side of the coin, Mick Jagger doesn't give a shit. He's having a great time. He's yucking it up with the rest of the actors and picking out toads to bring them to Keith Richards.
The snorting of your father's ashes, which it is true. You did in fact do it.
But all things considered, filming for Fitzcarraldo is progressing quite well, and for once they are actually ahead of schedule. But alas, nothing can go well for this project for long. While at the camp, Robards suddenly becomes violently ill. The doctor at the camp suspects that he has come down with amoebic dysentery and sends him home to the US immediately. While being treated in the US, his doctor forbids him to return to the set of Fitzcarraldo. Not only that, Robards is reportedly taking legal action against Werner, accusing him of creating an unsafe working environment. This holds up production for weeks, as Werner has to fly to New York to settle the legal disputes. My producer insists I should seek a legal ruling in the US to force Robards to fulfill his contract, but I do not need any legal ruling to know that I am doomed. More bad news. Mick Jagger is tapping out. He needs to go back on tour with the Rolling Stones and can't stay behind for a reshoot.
And I have decided that I would not replace his part. You can't replace him. So I think that's the biggest loss that I have had in my career as someone who makes films.
But worst of all, they had finished about 40% of the movie at this point, and now all their footage is completely useless. 2 years into production, millions of dollars in, and 2 camps later, and they have still not shot a single second of usable film. After crunching the numbers, Werner figures out that he needs to somehow gather up $3 million if he wants to continue. Now at this point, the investors are realizing that they are tossing money into a giant pit, and they are pulling out. So Werner travels back to Europe for a few weeks to speak to the investors directly. Allegedly, Werner went into the head offices of Gaumont, one of the main investors for the film, with a gun strapped to his belt. And during a meeting, he threatened to off himself on the spot if he did not get more funding for Fitzcarraldo. Again, allegedly. This information comes to us via Peter Berling, who plays the opera director in the movie and who doesn't particularly like the guy. This is just a rumor. I wouldn't even bother with something like this if Werner hadn't pulled nearly this exact stunt twice before.
And I told him I would shoot him, he would reach the next river bend and he would have 8 bullets in his head and the last would be for me.
But whatever happened, Werner walks out with another $3 million in funding. Production for Fitzcarraldo is somehow still going, but he desperately needs a new Fitzcarraldo. He somehow needs to find an actor who has the talent to play the role, can work on short notice, doesn't mind staying in an isolated jungle camp for a few months, and somehow has some degree of star power while also not demanding too much money. With no more options left, Werner pushes the Kinski button.
I want my opera house! I want my opera house!
Kinski was delighted to sign on as Fitzcarraldo, partially because it seemed like a cool project, but also because he was borderline destitute. Having pissed off every spaghetti western director known to man, the now 52-year-old Kinski was off doing films like Venom, which ends with Kinski in a climactic fistfight with a rubber snake. This was the film he picked over Indiana Jones, by the way. But while Kinski was amped for Fitzcarraldo, the big question on everyone's mind was, how was Klaus Kinski going to tackle living in the jungle for 4 months?
Schrei ich mal einen Film hier und einen Film mal schrei ich oder schrei ich nicht und du sagst es mir nicht, aber ich schrei aber nicht, leg mich doch am Arsch weg.
Quite badly, it turns out. The real trouble started only a few days after Kinski arrived at camp. A plane carrying 5 extras crashed during takeoff.
People have been in a plane crash and 5 of them in critical condition, 1 of them paralyzed.
All 5 of them were seriously injured and needed immediate medical attention. At the camp, they are desperately trying to reach them by radio. But Kinski, either out of stress or from not being the center of attention anymore, chooses this particular time to have one of his patented tantrums. So while Werner and the crew are trying to contact the plane crash survivors, Kinski is loudly ranting about how his morning coffee was not hot, but merely lukewarm.
I tried to say, Klaus, we have a plane down. 6 people may be dead. We have to organize a search party. And he would yell about his lukewarm coffee. You know what? I went to my hut because I had one last piece of Toblerone, this triangular Swiss chocolate, which was of the highest value in the jungle. I mean, I had kept it for weeks and weeks. I stepped that close into his face and ate the piece of chocolate. And that was too much for him. He just fell silent.
This was going to be a rough couple of months. By this time, both of the working ships had been constructed and transported out of Iquitos. One of them had been tied up in the Pongo, ready to be sent through the rapids for the big climax of the movie. The other one, the one that Werner is planning on dragging up the mountain, is on its way to the camp. Before they can begin dragging the ship, however, they need to prepare a path on the mountain for the ship to go in. First of all, they need to clear a kilometer-long strip in the thick Amazonian brush, removing all trees and vegetation. Then, they need to level the mountain. Right now, the mountainside sits at about a 60-degree incline. If Werner wants any hope of actually dragging the ship, he needs to level it down to at least 40 degrees. All he has to do this with is a couple of dozen workers, a few sticks of dynamite, and a Cat D8 bulldozer. The bulldozer is the real MVP of this project. Not only was it essential in clearing the strip, but it's also what they're going to be using to actually pull the boat. Those shots of people manning the turnstiles? Yeah, that's mostly for show. In reality, the boat is being pulled by the bulldozer just off screen. As you might imagine, this puts significant strain on the bulldozer. It's slurping 17 gallons of fuel an hour, and all the diesel they can get out there in the boonies has been watered down like 3 times before it gets to camp. So it is constantly breaking down, and all the spare parts have to be flown in from Miami, and that's gonna take a while. So right now, attention is on the other ship. It's been raining heavily the last couple of days and the Pongo is rising rapidly. They need to shoot the scenes there now. Werner tags along some of the crew with them, including 6 cameramen, and embarks on the 4-hour boat ride to the Pongo. Now the plan is to set the ship free on top of the Pongo and let it drift through the rapids while filming from a safe distance. But this turned out to be unspectacular. The boat is just too solidly constructed, and despite a few hard bumps on the rocks on both sides, it barely dents the hull. So for the next attempt, Werner's going to be a bit more daring. He's going to be on the ship as it goes through the rapids. Werner invites the entire crew to join him on the ship, with the exception of 2 of the cameramen, who are tasked with filming the scene from the shore. They're gonna send the ship through the Pongo again, but this time they're gonna try something a bit different. They're gonna build up speed and purposefully steer the ship straight into the rocks.
Klaus, komm rüber. Das war schon gut. Pass auf, bleib noch richtig rangekommen da.
3 of the cameramen get injured. Les Blanc gets slammed into the wall and stops filming. Beat Presser, the guy filming the record player, gets the viewfinder of his camera slammed into his face, giving him a nasty black eye. Thomas Mauch gets thrown across the deck and slices his hand open. He is bleeding profusely. The rest of the crew escape with little to no injuries. After clearing the rapids, the ship promptly runs aground on a sandbank, getting completely stuck. Werner and the crew, including the 4 cameramen, begin the 4-hour boat journey back to the camp. Wait, hang on. Werner tags along some of the crew with them, including 6 cameramen, and embarks on the 4-hour boat ride to the Pongo. Werner's left 2 cameramen on the shore.
On the right side, there's a solitary rock, and when we shot the ship crashing through these rapids, there was so much turmoil and so much excitement, and the boat ran onto ground right outside the rapids that we forgot the assistant cameraman with a separate camera there all night long. In the morning at breakfast, I said, where is Bubu, where is Klausmann? And we looked at each other and we said, oh my God, we forgot him on this slippery rock all night long. He was clinging onto it and he was really, really angry.
But even when Werner finally arrives back at the camp, there is no time to relax, because while they were out filming the scenes in the Pongo, there had been another incident.
We had an incident where people who were fishing, local people, native people who were fishing, were attacked by a semi-nomadic tribe that was not contacted by civilization. And one man was shot through the throat with an arrow, and he was shot through, it split open his shoulder, stuck through his neck, and was with a arrow tip was stuck in the other shoulder, but the arrow was still through his throat.
Another person, his wife was shot by 3 arrows that were 7 feet tall, and we had to operate on our kitchen table in the camp because we couldn't transport them anymore. They would have died. So for 8 hours we operated on them, and I assisted with a torchlight, lighting the abdominal cavities, and with the other hand I would spray the mosquitoes away.
Later, the people from the camp send a retaliatory raid consisting of 30 Ashaninka warriors, not carrying bows and arrows this time, but shotguns. They come back 2 days later, empty-handed. But despite there being a lot of drama at the camp right now, progress on the film itself is very slow. In fact, the boat that they're trying to pull up the mountain hasn't even made it to camp yet. So instead, Werner flies some of the actors down to Iquitos to film some of the scenes there. Werner has a tradition at this point of incorporating some very bizarre scenes in his films involving real animals, and Fitzcarraldo is no exception. Now, this film's animal scene tends to be overshadowed by everything else going on in this movie, but it's one of his best. It's the scene in Iquitos where one of the robber barons feeds money to a fish. This scene took 11 days to shoot.
We had these fish in a pond, and every single morning at feeding time at 5 in the morning we would come back and toss money at them that had the smell of fish on it, and whatever we tried, everything, and the fish wouldn't eat the money.
God, I love this man. A few weeks later, Werner and the crew returned to the camp. By this point, the ship is there waiting for them, but it's gonna take a lot of work before it's ready to be pulled up the mountain. The days drag on, one after the other, with only minimal progress being made. No one in the camp is quite sure what day it is, and everyone is bored out of their minds.
You can't go anywhere, you can't escape of this fucking stinking camp because you never know when they call you, because you have to be here because you're paid for, you're in the contract.
The indigenous people they've hired as extras are packing up to leave for the harvest. Their 3-month contracts ran out weeks ago, and they really want to go home to their families. Walter Saxer, the producer of the film, is able to convince some of them to stay for just a little bit longer, but it's not enough, and he has to go on scouting raids to recruit more. Also, as the ship pulling starts drawing closer and closer, people are really starting to question the safety of the whole operation. While preparing for the ship pulling scene, Werner attempts to drag the ship into position. And as they start pulling the boat out of the water, one of the steel support cables, as thick as a man's arm, starts fraying and coming apart. They manage to stop just in time before the cable snaps in two. The engineer that Werner hired is saying that the pulling mechanism is doomed to fail. The mountain is just way too steep. They would need to level it down to at least a 20-degree incline if they want to have any chance of this working, but Werner shuts him down immediately. I was adamantly against this idea, which would have destroyed the film's central metaphor. It had to be a boat going over a mountain, not through the Panama Canal. The engineer gives an estimate that the current ship pulling mechanism has about a 70% chance of failure, and if that happens, it could easily take 12 to 15 people out with it. In the end, he backs out of the project. On his way out, he recommends Werner install an extra safety cable and re-dig the support posts, which he does, at the cost of a few shooting days. Now, the safety of the project rests squarely in Werner's hands. Meanwhile, the extras hear about the odds, and they are really not fancying risking their lives for $3.50 a day.
Se nosotros vamos a estar empujando el barco, y el dueño del barco debe estar ahí atrás del barco también. Nosotros no vamos a morir solo, y el dueño no va a morir.
Back at the camp, people are trying to reason with Werner. What if you rewrite the scene so that Fitzcarraldo doesn't need to pull the ship up the mountain? What if you go for a model? But Werner won't hear it. It became clear to me that no one is on my side anymore. Not a single person. None. No one. Not a single one. In the midst of hundreds of Indian extras, dozens of forest workers, boatmen, kitchen personnel, the technical team, and the actors, solitude flailed at me like a huge, enraged animal. But I saw something the others did not see. Further delays. The rain in the rainforest is making things difficult. It's causing mudslides in the strip. When the bulldozer tries to clear out the mud, it slides into a ditch. Another couple of shooting days are wasted trying to fish it up. Werner has like a couple hundred people on payroll, so he really can't afford not to shoot anything. Not only that, the camp is starting to fall apart now too. The jungle humidity is just taking its toll on everything. People are complaining that the wooden walkways at the camp are collapsing from rot and termites. The film cameras are full of mold and keep malfunctioning. Werner's shoes have literally rotted away, and now he's walking around barefoot. Meanwhile, Klaus Kinski is literally kicking down buildings like he's 6 Red Bulls deep and just got demoted to Nova 2. He is not dealing well with his surroundings at all. Klaus Kinski had been in over 100 movies at this point, and the secret to starring in that many movies is to be in them as little as possible. Usually he would show up for a day or two of shooting, collect his check, and get out. So now that he's basically been forced to live on a movie set for 2 months, he is unraveling. Werner's starting to question if he can even complete the shoot at this point. His outbursts are really pissing off the rest of the actors, who are not shy about their feelings for the man.
And here they were really angry at Kinski. I mean, he yelled and shouted, and they settle their conflicts different, and they were really angry at him. And I used this anger for the film.
There's a really famous moment during the filming of this movie where one of the chiefs offered to have Klaus Kinski killed.
And I met some people, some men who long before had promised or had offered to kill Kinski for me, which I had declined. I still needed him for work.
Werner's actually kind of smart for associating himself with Kinski like this, because Kinski is one of the few people who can actually make Werner seem sane in comparison. In reality, Werner can get pretty wacko too, he's just a lot less explosive about it.
Kinski sometimes seriously believed that I was mad. This isn't true, of course. I'm quite sane, clinically sane, so to speak. It went so far that one day I seriously planned to firebomb him in his house.
Like, make no mistake, when Kinski was having his gamer rage moments in front of the locals, they were afraid, yeah, but they weren't afraid of Kinski. They were afraid of Werner.
One of their chiefs said to me, we were afraid, but don't you believe we were afraid of this screaming madman? They were afraid of me because I was so quiet.
By early June, the ship is finally ready to be pulled over the mountain. Despite lingering safety concerns, they're gonna give it a try. They are way over schedule, all the extras want to go home, the other actors need to go elsewhere for shooting. Werner basically has one shot to do this scene properly.
Pull harder! It works! It works!
The ship only gets a few feet above water before something breaks, and it slumps right back down again with a big groan. A giant metal coupling had snapped in two. Luckily, no one was injured, but this attempt seemed to confirm what everyone on the production feared. The pulling mechanism simply doesn't work. Back at the camp, the vibe is terrible. Kinski is going on hour-long rants about Herzog, calling him the most idiot anyone has ever been in the world. But he's preaching to the choir on this one. Everyone is so sick of this movie. Werner is wasting so much time and money on the goddamn boat. Werner tries his best to ignore them, but there's one group he can't afford to ignore: the investors. By now, the distributors have invested millions of dollars into what has amounted to a complete disaster. An endless money vacuum of a movie that is never getting finished. And they are pulling out of the project until Werner proves he can actually move the ship. But he can't just give up on this scene. This is like the central metaphor of the movie. The entire movie is building up to this moment. He needs to do this.
If I abandon this project, I would be a man without dreams. And I don't want to live like that. I live my life, or I end my life with this project.
So a few days later, Werner tries again, and again, and again. And every time, something snaps, or breaks, or bends, and the ship of Sisyphus falls right back down to where it started. One must imagine Werner Herzog happy.
It's like a curse weighing on an entire landscape. So we are cursed with what we are doing here. It's a land that God, if he exists, has created in anger. Even the stars up here in the sky look like a mess. There is no harmony in the universe.
But he refuses to give up. He will push that ship up the mountain. He just needs better equipment. So he buys stronger hooks, stronger cables. He flies in another engineer from Lima to help with the construction. And once all of that is in place, he might just be able to pull it off. But at this point, it might be too late. Werner has to leave camp for a few weeks to film some other scenes in Iquitos. In the meantime, he leaves his producer, Walter Saxer, in charge of pulling the ship. While in Iquitos, Werner meets with his brother Lucky, who's been dealing with the finances of the movie. It is looking very bad. According to Lucky, they will be out of money in 4 days. Lucky is held up in the office, sending pages-long messages on the telex machine, just begging the distributors for just a little more money. But it's looking unlikely. Werner is simply out of cards. But the movie is still probably being made, right? They've already shot most of it. It's just they might need to use a plastic model for this specific scene. It won't be the same, but at least it will actually get released, right? The next day, Werner gets a message over the radio. It's Walter. They've moved the ship. When Werner returns to camp a week later, the ship is still at the bottom of the mountain, but this time they've swapped out all the old cables and hooks with much stronger equipment. Now they've already moved the ship successfully with this mechanism before, so they know they have a real chance this time. Even so, financially, they are running on fumes at this point, so if this doesn't work, it might be the death knell of the project. But they need to try, so they try to pull a boat and nothing. As it turns out, one of the wooden skids had gotten stuck and is holding back the ship. Bit of a hiccup, but it's nothing that a few hours and a chainsaw can't fix. The next day, they try to pull the boat again, and snap! Uh-oh, that might be it. Well, as it turns out, one of the gears in the winch had snapped off, causing the cable to jam. Luckily, it's a relatively easy fix. Next time, they might not be so lucky. The next day, they give it one more shot. The motors start revving, the steel cables start flexing, and the ship slowly but surely makes it almost all the way to the first dead post. So early in the day, we towed the ship 11 meters uphill in 60 seconds. All the conflict and everything that had been dammed up during the long, wearying years of working together vanished, and Walter and I fell into each other's arms. Over the next 10 days, the ship is slowly moved all the way to the top of the mountain. From there, they are finally able to secure some emergency funding to finish the rest of the movie. Werner is 2 years over schedule and millions of dollars over budget, but at the very least, it's looking like Fitzcarraldo is actually getting completed. After they get the ship on top of the mountain, they have to drag it about 800 meters across the mountain plateau, though compared to everything else, this is the easy part. They can't drop it into the river on the other side yet though, because the water level is too low, so they need to wait 5 months for the rainy season to arrive. In November, they return to the camp, and over the course of 4 days, they drag the ship down the mountain towards the river on the other side. The ship comes crashing down into the river at a weird angle, making it look like it's about to capsize, but miraculously, it corrects itself. There was no pain, no joy, no excitement, no relief, no happiness, no sound, not even a deep breath. All I grasped was a profound uselessness, or to be more precise, I had merely penetrated deeper into its mysterious realm. Today, on Wednesday, the 4th of November 1981, shortly after 12 noon, we got the ship from Rio Camisea over a mountain into the Rio Urubamba. All that is to be reported is this: I took part. Werner had just successfully carried a ship over a mountain to the river on the other side, but he's not quite done. The other ship that he sent through the Pongo half a year ago is still stuck on the sandbank, so now that the water level is high enough, they need to pry it off and sail it to Iquitos, where they'll shoot the very last scenes of the movie. Then Fitzcarraldo is in the bag. Well, that's not quite true. They still had one more scene to shoot. For whatever reason, be it time constraints or finances drying up, Werner decided to shoot some of the scenes with the boat going through the Pongo with a plastic boat in a studio set. So some of the shots were done with a plastic replica after all. The film was eventually released in theaters in October 1982, but somehow that still wasn't the end of Werner's trouble. What I did not expect were things like walking down the street in Munich a few months after Fitzcarraldo came out and seeing a man running frantically towards me. All of a sudden he leapt up in the air, kicked me in the stomach, picked himself up from the ground and yelled, "That's what you deserve, you pig!" With the film having recently released, it must have awoken the aforementioned bad press, which proceeded to make itself known once again. But despite an initial PR hiccup, the film was, by all accounts, a success. It even ended up winning him Best Director at the Cannes Film Festival that year.
But I really want to kill him.
Yes, he also did want to kill me.
I couldn't find anything on how the movie did at the box office, but even if Werner didn't make his money back from sales alone, the notoriety he got from this movie has probably more than made up for the money he spent on it. Fitzcarraldo is still widely considered a classic today, but it's a film that, more than any other film I can think of, is competing for attention with its own production. Now, people have been playing up how difficult Fitzcarraldo was to make from the very beginning. Even early promotional material for Fitzcarraldo calls it the film whose making surpassed the daring of the historical event on which it is based. It also didn't help that right after Fitzcarraldo completed its theatrical run, it was soon followed up by another film called Burden of Dreams. Burden of Dreams is a legendary film by Les Blank documenting the production of Fitzcarraldo. It was filmed over the course of 2 trips, one 2-week trip to the first camp, i.e. the one that burned down, and one longer 9-week trip to the second camp. The initial premise is already very unique. I can't think of any other instance where a film was released back to back with a documentary on how the film was made, where both films were proper cinematic releases. But calling Burden of Dreams simply a documentary about the making of Fitzcarraldo is probably selling it short, because Burden of Dreams is more like if Fitzcarraldo was a documentary. Werner's insistence on not shooting Fitzcarraldo in a studio set means that almost everything you see in the film has to be done for real, and basically none of it goes according to plan. Throughout the entire film, Werner and the rest of the production crew are battling an endless barrage of technical difficulties, labor disputes, money troubles, Klaus Kinski. But worst of all was definitely the ship-pulling scene. Werner doesn't even successfully move the ship in this film. You just see him spending years preparing to pull the ship, failing spectacularly, and then regretting every single decision he's made in his entire life.
The birds are in misery. I don't think they sing, they just screech in pain.
By the end, Werner has essentially completed his transformation into Fitzcarraldo. The same frenzied passion that causes Fitzcarraldo to push a ship up a mountain feels very similar to the force that drives Werner Herzog to do the same, and it utterly consumes them both. As the production goes on, you see the bags under Werner's eyes just get heavier and heavier, to where at the end of the film he looks 10 years older than when he started. There's a reason people don't make movies like this anymore, and that's because it just sucks. And Burden of Dreams makes that abundantly clear. It's humid as hell, mold is growing in and on everything, and if it doesn't get moldy, it rusts. All the people are getting eaten alive by mosquitoes, and the huts are getting eaten by termites. And the question that I end up asking myself is, why? Why bother going through all this? One thing that I found interesting was how everyone on the production kind of assumes that Werner has a clear reason for doing what he's doing, but when people press him on it, he'll only give sort of a vague half answer like, I knew moving a ship over a mountain would be a great metaphor, which yeah, it is a pretty good metaphor, but is it really that good to the point where you'd be willing to sacrifice so many years of your life pursuing it? In the end, I guess that's what I admire most about Herzog, just the lengths to which he is willing to go to achieve his artistic vision, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone else. He's always been the kind of guy who's been willing to fight tooth and nail to make the art that he wants to make. And Fitzcarraldo is by far the biggest example of that. Which is why, even though Fitzcarraldo is far from his best film, I do think it's the most important testament to Werner Herzog as an artist, and why it's justifiably hailed as his magnum opus. Werner's 10-year run from Aguirre in 1972 to Fitzcarraldo in 1982 is one of the strongest decades you'll find in any director's filmography. But also, that run ends with Fitzcarraldo. After that it gets... well, you're gonna have to turn in next time for that.